In the spring of 1962, a coal miner named Elias Hartwell descended into a shaft beneath Centralia, Pennsylvania, that had been sealed for nearly 30 years. He carried a carbide lamp, a canvas tool bag, and a hand-drawn map given to him by a retired company foreman. By the time Hartwell was pulled back to the surface 14 hours later, his hair had turned the color of bone ash, his lamp was missing, and he refused to speak for 9 days. When he finally broke his silence, the first thing he said was that the deepest beam in the mine was not made by any company, any union, or any man he had ever heard of. The second thing he said was that something down there was still using it. This is the story of what Elias Hartwell claimed to find past the last beam. Hartwell was born in 1919 in a row house owned by the Lehigh Valley Coal Company. His father worked the seams and his grandfather worked them before that. By the time Elias was 16, he was already 800 feet underground. What set him apart was that he listened to the old men. He listened when retired miners told stories about German engineers who showed up in 1903 with surveying equipment that nobody recognized. He listened when an Irish priest mentioned a chamber his grandfather had walked into in 1881 that had Latin writing carved into the stone, even though no Roman had ever set foot in the Allegheny region. And he listened when his own father, on a winter night in 1939, told him the Lehigh Valley Coal Company had explicit written orders never to dig past a certain depth in the number 7 shaft. In February of 1962, a retired foreman named Wilhelm Brandt knocked on Hartwell's door. Brandt was a German-trained engineer dying of black lung, and he asked Elias if he wanted to see what was at the bottom of number 7. The shaft had been sealed in 1933, officially due to a methane pocket that killed 2 surveyors. Unofficially, Brandt claimed the surveyors were not killed by methane. As the foreman on duty the day it was sealed, Brandt spent 3 decades trying to forget what he pulled out of that hole. He wanted one more man to see what he had seen, so the knowledge would not die with him. The closure report Brandt filed contained a single translated sentence. The shaft was closed because what was below could not be safely worked by the men they had. It made no mention of methane, only suggesting that the Lehigh Valley Coal Company did not employ the kind of men who could safely work whatever was down there. Hartwell agreed to go on the night of April 11, 1962. Brandt sat at the surface with a kerosene lantern and a hand-drawn map, giving instructions through a field telephone rigged into the shaft. The map showed 27 beams. The shaft, according to Brandt, had been deliberately mismeasured in official records. Its real depth was nearly twice what was documented. Past the 27th beam, the timber stopped being timber. The first 1,000 feet were ordinary, consisting of the same blue-black anthracite Hartwell had grown up looking at. He counted the beams as he descended. Each beam was numbered in faded white paint, and at every 5th beam a small iron plaque was bolted into the rock. The plaques did not bear the company logo. Instead, they featured a symbol that looked like a wheel inside a wheel, surrounded by writing that was definitely not English, German, or Latin. At beam 20, the temperature changed, growing warmer rather than colder. At beam 23, the rock stopped being anthracite. Hartwell described it as a polished black stone, smooth as glass, with metallic veins that caught the light from his carbide lamp and sent it bouncing in unnatural directions. At beam 26, the field telephone went dead. Brandt's voice was gone, replaced by total silence. Hartwell was now roughly 4,000 feet down, well past the official depth of 2,200 feet. He kept going. When he reached beam 27, he realized it was not wood. It was warm to the touch through his glove and made of a material he had no name for. The entire beam was covered in shallow lines forming shapes like letters that had been melted halfway back into the material. Beyond beam 27, the rough, irregular walls of a hand-cut mine gave way to a cylindrical, engineered passage. The floor was perfectly level, with no tool marks or blast scars. The walls were made of the same polished black stone, featuring regular alcoves that each held a single object. This aligns with historical anomalies investigated by modern alternative researchers. There is a growing body of independent research suggesting the official history of North America, particularly between 1700 and 1900, is incomplete. This perspective often uses the term Tartaria to describe a potential missing civilization that left behind advanced infrastructure. The polished black stone and melted writing Hartwell encountered closely matched descriptions in 19th century engineering journals that were pulled from circulation after the 1893 Chicago Exposition, as well as artifacts recovered from Ohio mound builder sites that the Smithsonian cataloged in 1881 and later declared non-existent. Hartwell knew none of this in 1962. He followed the corridor into a circular chamber roughly 40 feet across. The room was illuminated by a soft, even glow that came directly from the walls themselves. In the center stood a metallic device about 7 feet tall, shaped like a vertical cylinder on a wide base, with vents around its circumference. As he approached, Hartwell realized the device was humming and generating heat. The hum didn't sound like a piston or a turbine. It sounded like a tuning fork that had been struck a long time ago and never stopped vibrating. On the far side of the chamber was a doorway sealed by a flat plate of black stone set flush into the frame. In the center of the plate was the carved wheel within a wheel symbol. Around the doorway were 6 smaller carvings. 5 were maps. One showed the eastern coast of North America with unfamiliar river pathways. Another depicted a circular continent that does not appear on modern globes. And a third depicted a night sky with constellations that do not match any era of the past 10,000 years. The 6th carving was a profile portrait of a face that appeared human but with strangely altered proportions. Hartwell stood at the doorway for several minutes. He felt a profound certainty that the door was locked to keep something in, and that whatever was on the other side was aware of him. Suddenly, his carbide lamp went out completely, as if someone had pinched the flame. The chamber remained lit by the sourceless glow of the walls. Hartwell turned around and walked out. When he reached the surface 14 hours later, the sky was overcast. Brant looked at Hartwell's newly white hair and asked no questions. He simply nodded, gathered his map, and walked away. Brant was found dead 3 days later from black lung complications. For the next 26 years, Hartwell tried to tell his story. The coal company threatened him with criminal trespass, a state geologist recommended he see a doctor, and a newspaper treated it as local folklore. He died in 1988, with his last words reported concerning a wheel that was still turning. In May of 1962, just 1 month after Hartwell's descent, a fire was intentionally set in a landfill on the edge of Centralia. The fire spread into the coal seam and has been burning ever since, forcing the total evacuation of the town. The official narrative has never explained why the fire has resisted every cleanup attempt for 6 decades. Furthermore, satellite mapping shows the fire's heat signature traces a cylindrical pattern descending vertically into the earth, centered on a point approximately 4,000 feet below the surface, well below any documented coal seam, but exactly where Elias Hartwell claimed to have found the last beam.